The romanticized West is a lie. Forget the quick draw and the clean, cinematic death. The reality of frontier justice was often a slow, sadistic, and public spectacle designed not to execute, but to terrorize. Imagine this: you've stepped into a lawless border town circa 1875. You're expecting the crack of a pistol, the thunder of a posse, but what you hear is a low, sickening gasping. That sound is the hook of a new system of control. Make sure to subscribe if you want the truth behind the myths, and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. That man isn't dead yet. He's tied to the hanging tree, his toes barely brushing the dusty ground. He isn't enjoying a quick snap of the neck. He's slowly suffocating, wrestling for breath for hours, maybe because of a simple stolen horse. This drawn-out agony, the half-hanging, was deliberately chosen. For some in the town, it was a perverse entertainment. For the presiding sheriff, it was a chilling message, a raw enforcement of border justice. But the question is, how far did the West truly go to sow this kind of fear and enforce order through sheer pain? Look closely. He is still conscious, coughing, his feet scratching the dirt. You look around, and the strangest thing is the onlookers. They stand there casually, as if this prolonged torture is perfectly normal and accepted civic event. This technique became popular because many communities didn't want a rapid penalty. A quick drop was over too instantly. A slow strangulation, however, communicated a terrifying message that everyone, even miles away, would understand. Texas and Kansas newspapers from around 1878 described how large crowds would gather early, some bringing provisions, as if planning to spend the entire day there. A Kansas reporter once wrote, "The victim struggled for air until the dust that settled on his face became muddy. The suffering was horrific. No broken spine, no instant relief, just hours of exhausting, desperate gasping for oxygen. Some men would try to support their weight on their toes until their legs began to tremble uncontrollably. Others would clutch the rope until their fingernails were torn off." A forensic pathologist in Nebraska in 1882 noted rope burns on the neck and deep, violent scratch marks on the victim's chest, indicating the man endured conscious pain far longer than anyone wished to admit. Why did they cling to this barbaric border practice for so long? Because fear supposedly brought peace to the settlements. Lawmen claimed it scared potential thieves away. Ranchers asserted that they were protecting their livestock and resources, declaring that a man's character changed fundamentally once he had witnessed it. But as gruesome as the half-hanging looked, the next punishment was even more intimate and scarring: branding. It literally involved stepping into the skin of the condemned, a mark that would follow them everywhere. Outlaws were publicly branded. A frontier sheriff might order an iron heated in advance within a small, sweltering border jail, already hot from a blazing stove. He'd hold the iron in the coals until it glowed bright orange, and the watching outlaw knew exactly what was coming. While branding livestock made sense, the branding of human beings represented a dark, chilling turn in the Wild West. Court records from Nevada, New Mexico, and Colorado, spanning 1860 to 1885, document dozens of branding sentences. Horse thieves were the primary targets, but occasionally gamblers, stagecoach robbers, or men who had repeatedly escaped from prison were made to feel the hot iron. A Nevada judge in 1872 even wrote the sentence, "Carry the mark into the judgment." Witnesses clearly described the critical moment. First, the smell of burning skin, then the scream. It wasn't a long scream, just a sudden burst, because after a second or two, the pain became so intense the body simply began to shut down. Years later, a former outlaw named Thomas Quirk described it. "The agony stayed beneath the skin for weeks, felt like a fire blazing." The brand marks were placed in various locations. Some sheriffs burned the palm, ensuring the man could never shake another person's hand without exposure. Others branded the shoulder like livestock. For a humiliating few, the cheek. Once that mark was there, concealment was almost impossible. Every bartender, ranch owner, and sheriff would demand to see it before a man's word was accepted. But the branding mark was not the low point. The next method left no physical trace initially. Victims were often stripped naked and tied to an anthill. In the Arizona Territory in 1883, a sheriff ordered a man to undress and be dragged into the desert at sunrise. The ground was intentionally chosen to be already baking hot. They wanted to ensure the ants were awake and aggressive. The punishment: tied up, naked, near a mound, he simply waited. How much time could a person survive that? According to ranch records, sometimes it only took a few minutes before biting ants covered the man everywhere at once. Cowboys told stories of it for years. They had seen men trying to hold their breath, hoping to stop the stinging, to no effect. Ranch hand George Mills wrote in his 1885 diary that he heard screams so piercing they frightened the horses. Most victims lost consciousness from the pain, but some first begged for water or mercy. One wonders why they went to such an extreme. Turned out it wasn't always about the severity of the crime. Sometimes it was solely about setting an unmistakable example. Let the ants judge him, one old man declared. Sometimes the mob released the victim at sundown. In other cases, relatives paid money for an early release. The casualty figures are hard to verify, but Maricopa County records between 1879 and 1888 list 3 confirmed deaths, all labeled anthill justice. If a man did survive, his scars told the grim tale. Some never healed. Others made him leave the city forever. It was more than pain. It was pure, simple humiliation. And if you think this was the worst the desert could offer, wait for the next method. Men were deliberately dragged behind horses. In a Wyoming border saloon in 1876, a man's life ended when a mob tied his ankle and hitched him behind a horse. No one moved. You could see the raw terror in every face, even the faces of the law enforcement. The dragging was usually the end. There was no second chance. Why use horses? Because everyone knew that a horse, once moving, rarely slowed down due to screams. Court records from Wyoming and Colorado from the 1870s list at least 6 public dragging penalties, mostly for cattle theft or treason. In a Laramie case, the victim was pulled nearly half a mile before the noises stopped. A newspaper that year described it as harsh, frontier-style justice. Witnesses stated that the sand and rocks inflicted more damage than the hooves. A rancher's 1882 diary described finding pieces of skin and shirt 3 days later in the sagebrush. Some people left the town after seeing it once. Why not just a quick gunshot? Because public pain carried a clear, unforgettable message. Sometimes the dragging ended with a shot to complete the torture. Sometimes the victim kept moving, barely alive, until even the crowd felt sickened. Even the men who gave the orders rarely slept soundly afterward. The worst part was that sometimes all this chaos began because of a broken promise, not even a major crime. But there is one more method, where the deepest scars weren't immediately visible. Fingers were broken one after the other. In 1884, a protocol from Silver City, New Mexico, reported an outlaw leaving prison with hands twice their normal size. Every finger was broken. Some hung only by the skin. This occurred more often than people were willing to admit, especially when a gun's location or a confession was needed. Breaking fingers was simple, and in the Wild West, it wasn't called torture. It was called the art of persuasion. Why did men talk so fast after the first crack? Sometimes it started with a poker debt, sometimes with a missing horse. The town blacksmith had the strongest hands, so he was given the job. He would grasp a finger, twist it slowly, then quickly snap it. The cracking could be heard down the hall. A Colorado newspaper in 1879 reported on 3 stagecoach robbery suspects who all refused to speak until 2 knuckles each were broken. And suddenly all secrets spilled out. In most instances, the doctor could do little. With luck, there might be a few bindings. A survivor wrote years later that the pain during cold weather was worse than any hangover. Some men lost all their fingers but still held their secret. Others gave in after just one. The craziest part is how normal people stood by and acted as if it were simply part of the job. Lawmen merely shrugged. Ranch hands looked away. The true scars lasted a lifetime. There is something even colder than broken bones, though. Prisoners were made to march for days in chains. Arizona Territory, 1887. 2 men in leg irons, wrists chained together, stumble 20 miles over rock and scrub. The heat turned everything. breathing into fire. That's how the sheriffs and local enforcers described the infamous chain march. This wasn't just transportation. It was a punishment used on captives they were determined to break, not merely contain. Consider the brutal math. How long can a person endure without water while iron continuously saws and slices their skin? Court records from this intense decade document at least 8 instances of these marches lasting 3 days or more, sometimes with no respite whatsoever. The reason for the march didn't matter. Some were convicted murderers, others were minor thieves. A lawman in Prescott scribbled in 1890, "Let them earn their next drink." Some towns simply abandoned them, not even bothering to confirm if the prisoners survived. A railway worker near Tucson once reported sighting a crew of 5 men whose wrists were cinched to their belts, barely upright after the second day. People forgot the details of their crimes. They only remembered the sickening sight of them collapsing toward the first trickle of water they saw. The men who returned from these marches were fundamentally changed. Some never recovered. Running a prisoner in chains through the inferno of the desert was an unforgettable penalty in itself. Quick reminder, if the truth of the Old West is holding your attention, please hit that like button right now. It truly helps this channel uncover more hidden history for you. Picture this: Dodge City, Kansas, 1871. A crowd congregates. The sheriff has detained a man accused of card sharping, fraud. There's no hearing, no jury, no questions. The accused is forced against a wooden stake, and the lawman raises a heavy 6-inch spike. Within seconds, an ear is directly nailed to the rough wood. Some spectators flinch, but most stand rigid, watching every grimace and twitch. Why the ear specifically? It was a walking, bleeding warning. In places like Deadwood and Dodge, the message was absolute. Cheat, steal, or lie, and you will lose a piece of yourself. Prison records in Kansas from the 1870s mention at least 5 such instances in just 2 years. One gambler, Jim Brady, lost half his ear. "They wanted me to feel it for years," he told a reporter in 1885. The men screamed, some collapsing into unconsciousness, but the frontier law remained unforgiving. The nail was left in place until sunrise, or sometimes longer, occasionally tearing the ear in half as it was finally pulled free. A doctor once recorded, "I have never seen so much blood from such a small hole." Most victims fled the settlement afterward. Some grew their hair long to hide the disfigurement. But there is one penalty from which no one could escape, one that could not be concealed. Arizona Territory, 1889. The sun is a blazing hammer as 2 men are consumed by the edge of a dry creek bed. Their arms are trussed behind their backs. Locals excavate holes just wide enough for their heads to stick out. The earth is firmly packed around their shoulders. Thus begins the justice of the buzzards. The locals gather, lying on their backs, shielding their eyes with their hands, and waiting for the vultures to arrive. The core idea was to make the penalty slow and intensely visible. Between 1882 and 1894, district records document at least 7 such cases, mostly in southern Arizona. One victim lasted 11 hours, losing consciousness twice before the end. A student spectator told his teacher the pleading didn't stop until the huge birds landed. The entire crowd stood in silence. Some turned away as the birds descended. Why use birds? Vultures work fast and leave few traces. It was about both intense humiliation and terminal pain. Ranchers were sometimes paid to dig men out if the crime was minor. But in cases of serious horse theft or betrayal, no one bothered. Afterward, the holes were simply filled, and the land was forgotten. Yet, sometimes, the punishments felt far more personal and targeted. You could hear a man begin to beg before the first splinter even touched him, because everyone in the room understood how swiftly this changed everything. In mining towns like Leadville in 1886, this method was deployed when a gang needed a rapid answer. A thin piece of wood, shoved under a fingernail, was enough to make a seasoned adult tremble. But then someone lit it, and that transformed the terror. What would you confess to stop that rising flame? Men used this tactic during robberies, territory disputes, and even some sheriffs, lacking patience for lies, employed it. A Colorado miner noted in his diary that a horse thief confessed after the lighting of the second splinter. "He spoke like water from a burst pipe," the entry stated. The flames never lasted long, but they burned deep enough that the pain sank right to the bone. Doctors in frontier settlements rarely treated these injuries. They'd simply bandage the fingers and hope the nails remained attached. Some men lost entire fingertips, and others lived the rest of their days with black, scarred veins. A doctor in 1889 even confirmed that victims sometimes passed out before the fire touched them, suffocated purely by the fear. People often speak of the Wild West as just shootouts and saloons, but the penalties inflicted behind locked doors secured more confessions than any badge. Once you've heard of one of these sessions, you understand why some broken men walked out of prison without a single bullet being fired. Yet, there were also penalties where cold was used instead of fire, and the suffering lasted for days, the food and hope fading with each passing night. In the winter of 1882, the temperature in Montana dropped below freezing for almost an entire week. A ranch crew left a man tied to a post in an open field, his hands bound, a thin blanket tossed over his shoulders as a mockery. His crime: selling information to a rival outfit. How long can a human body survive when the cold relentlessly sinks into the very bones? Ranchers used this method far more frequently than city sheriffs. It was a way to solve problems silently, cleanly. The victim was left just long enough that they felt every passing hour. Each night, the cold stiffened his joints. Every morning, someone might throw him a crust of bread or a cup of water, just to prolong the end. There are at least 3 documented cases between 1881 and 1887 in the Northern Territories where this punishment lasted between 2 and 5 days. A ranch foreman later recounted, "The cold speaks for itself. The bound men couldn't move, couldn't warm themselves, and couldn't sleep. The wind cut through clothing. Ice formed on the rope. Most fell into delirium by the second day, talking nonsense or begging for a fire they never received. No shot, no public spectacle, just time doing its agonizing work." Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please do us a massive favor. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any future videos about the harsh truths of history. Until next time.